So good to see each of you, and I want to welcome our visitors that are here as well. Whether you're a first-time visitor or you've been here a few times, we're grateful to have you and love to get to visit with you a bit after services as well. If you've been with us as we've been listening to Mark tell us the story of Jesus, then you probably noticed that Mark gives us all of these incredible miracle stories. Jesus does amazing things like he's casting out demons. He's taking loaves and fishes and multiplying into, a feast for 5,000 and 4,000 people. He's healing the sick from all kinds of different ailments and all of these things. In one particular place in Mark, Jesus, he heals a man who was both deaf and mute, couldn't hear and couldn't speak. And of course, this is such a beautiful thing to imagine as we see a man who goes from not being able to hear to being to hear, not being able to speak to being able to speak. You've seen videos where a baby, just weeks old, months old, that has some kind of serious hearing impairment, hasn't been able to hear the voice of mom or dad, but through what the doctors have done, there's a moment where they're able to actually hear the voice of their parents, and you watch those videos, instant tears, it's just such a powerful, beautiful kind of thing. It doesn't get much better than that. And after that miracle, there were many people there that Mark tells us they were astonished. They were just absolutely blown away, astonished beyond measure. And they said, Jesus has done all things well. Jesus has done all things well. And as people that have been listening, as Mark has been telling us this story, we agree with them. He has done all things well. Which makes our passage for this morning a little bit confusing. I'd like for us to listen to Mark 8, verses 22 through 26. It's a short scene, and it's interesting. And Jesus and the disciples came to Bethsaida. And some people brought to Jesus a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And the blind man looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him to his home, saying, "Don't even enter the village." At first blush, when we read and listen to this story, it kind of seems like Jesus has a false start in this miracle, in this healing. It's very unusual when you're reading the Gospels, Mark or any of the Gospels, for Jesus to ask a question like this to somebody that he's doing a miracle for. Jesus is known for making incredible declarations, incredible pronouncements. Take up your mat and walk, Not, are you getting any feeling in your legs coming back? But to this man, he says, "Do you see anything?" And the answer doesn't really fit our miracle stories either, because the man says, "Kind of. Do you see anything?" "Well, I see people, but they look like trees moving around." Evidently, this man was able to see at some point, lost his sight, and now he knows, I see better than I was seeing, but I don't see people as they really are. Everything is still fuzzy. Everything's still blurry. And so Mark tells us that Jesus laid his hands on him again, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And we who have been listening to this story think, again? Again? Why again? And yet at the same time, Because we've been following with Mark, we've begun to see that whenever there seems to be something confusing or out of place in what we are told, it's usually because Mark is trying to share something deeply meaningful and important with us, trying to highlight something, and it may just take us zooming out a bit, or it may take us zooming in, looking even closer at the words that he's using, whatever the case is. In this case, if we just zoom out a touch, we see that this story makes perfect sense. It makes sense of what is to come in the Gospel of Mark. The question that Jesus asked the blind man is a very simple question. What do you see? At the same time, this is like one of the central themes of Mark's story. People meeting Jesus and not seeing him clearly, not understanding him. Throughout the story, scene after scene after scene, Jesus is misunderstood and not seen as he really is. And as it turns out, Jesus in front of his disciples, and Mark retelling it so that we can experience it as well, Jesus is sort of acting out a parable in the healing of this man, an enacted parable. He has this man who is born, this blind man, and he's going to use this scene to introduce a series of interactions that he's going to have with the disciples. Mark is going to show us in this moment something about what is coming in the next couple of chapters. Because over and over and over again in what follows in Mark 9 and 10 is that the disciples do not see clearly. If Jesus asked them the question, what do you see? They would have to say, if they only knew, they would have to say, it's very fuzzy, it's very blurry, we don't understand yet. In fact, just a couple verses later in Mark chapter 8, Jesus asked the disciples a question. Who do people say I am? They say, well, some this, some that. But who do you say that I am? And Peter, with all the enthusiasm, you are the Christ. And if we were reading in Matthew kind of says, attaboy, Peter, that's right. But Mark, 2-3 verses later, Jesus said, guys, I'm going to suffer and die as part of the mission that God has sent me on. And Peter pulls Jesus aside and began to rebuke him about what Jesus has just predicted. Jesus is going to, get behind me, Satan. You've got your mind set on the things of man, not on the things of God. That happens just breaths, right? After Peter has made this bold and lovely confession of faith. What's happening here? Peter, he's seeing, but he's not really seeing. And what he needs a second touch from Jesus. The disciples need a second touch to see clearly. Just like this man, this blind man, needed a second touch to see clearly, Peter and the rest of the disciples, they need another touch from Jesus in order to begin to see him with true clarity. The same thing happens again. Jesus predicts his coming death again, and he tells them the Son of Man's going to have all of these terrible things happen to him, but it's going to be okay. There's be a resurrection and all of that. And they don't understand. This time, Mark tells us that they kept silent. They kept silent. They did not understand. They were afraid to ask him. So they changed the subject. I don't know what he's talking about. But by the way, talking amongst themselves, not with Jesus, but by the way, which one of us do you think is the best apostle? Jesus just said, I'm going to die. Now, which one of us do you think is probably number one here? What's happening, right? They're beginning to see, but they need another touch. They're beginning to see, but they need more clarity. A third time, Jesus tells them the Messiah is going to suffer and die. And he gets pretty graphic. I mean, he says they're going to spit on him, they're going to mock him, they're going to beat him, flog him, and kill him. And what do you know? But James and John come walking up to Jesus after he finishes his little talk, and they say, interesting, I would like for the two of us, if it's possible, to be at your right and left hand in your kingdom. And you, for Jesus, for imagining him, you could just, were you listening, Were you listening? Disputing about who was the greatest, asking to even be the greatest. They can't see clearly. They need a second touch. It's almost like when Jesus is healing this man. And he goes through the first healing, and the man says, I can see kind of. It's almost like you can imagine Jesus looking at a couple of the apostles over here talking amongst themselves. Maybe they're not paying quite good enough attention. Like, hey, I do want you to see this, because this is actually you right here. And he heals him again, and he can see. And the disciples, they needed that second touch. We do too. We do too. Like the disciples, there are times in which we believe we see with 20/20 vision, and yet are failing to see Jesus with any kind of clarity. She was in her late 80s when I met her, and she could hardly see, literally, physically. She was nearly blind. But she was starting to see Jesus. Yeah, late 80s. She was starting to see Jesus and making all kinds of, wonderful progress. And yet, still, with all of Peter's, confidence, said, I'm glad that the church, this church, is becoming more diverse. Just as long as their people don't start marrying our people. What's happening? My mom told me, she's late 80s, my mom told me the Bible said that was wrong, and I believe it. She needed a second touch from Jesus. He was totally convinced that he had the right doctrine about all of the issues, the ones that really mattered. Turns out there was quite a lengthy list of issues that really mattered, but he had the right doctrine on all of those issues. What he didn't realize is that the zeal that he had for defending the faith, as it were, was leading him down a war path of division and conflict. There were spiritual casualties to his, righteous crusades. People who, hearing what he was saying and the way that he was saying it, would say, if this is Christianity, I'm not interested. I don't want it. It's not for me. A lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm, but needed a second touch. Sometimes we're in desperate need of having our vision clarified, and like the disciples, we have no idea, no ability to even see it. It's possible for us to say things like, if the Bible says it, we believe it, and yet find that the Bible has never once conflicted with our opinion about fill-in-the-blank position that we have, whether it be politically, whether it be even some religious belief, some matter of faith. It's possible for us to, like in a couple chapters in Mark, say amen with Jesus as he commands the rich young man to give his possessions away while clinging as absolutely tightly as we can to our own material gains. It's possible to affirm that Jesus is in control, that God is sovereign, and yet in our daily life be clinging to worry and to fear. You know, it is possible to need our vision clarified, to need a second touch from Jesus. Sometimes we actually know we need a second touch and don't think that we deserve to get one, or don't think we can get one from Jesus. I don't think I've been to a church, to my knowledge, I've never been to a church that did not have several individuals who feel like they know Jesus or know about Jesus, and they have a degree of faith in God, and you know, they've been baptized, they've gone to church a lot, and yet they feel that there's no way that they have much of a chance of heaven. Literally, you know, a chance of heaven. Sometimes they'll say even things, I just hope I've been good enough, or I hope I've done enough to make it. I hope. It's more of a hope so, right, than a confident expectation. They want heaven, they want to see, you know, they want Jesus, they want to see, like you know, the man here. But sometimes even for 50 or 60 years, carry that burden, that weight around, wishing they could have a second touch. And the disciples are like us in both cases, whatever time, whatever moment in our life that might be. Whether we need a second touch and don't know it, or we know we need more from Jesus, but we don't know how to get it. At some points, the disciples presume absolutely incredible sight. I mean, they presume to see, right? It doesn't get any more presumptuous than Peter taking the Lord aside and rebuking him about what the Lord has said. But at other times, the disciples are afraid even to ask Jesus for clarity. They're afraid of what he might say or how he might perceive them. They know they need more knowledge, but they're literally too scared to ask. The beauty of Jesus' two-stage healing in our passage this morning is that Jesus does not just show us that we need a second touch, but he actually shows us how to get it. Did you hear what Jesus asked the man? He said, "Do you see anything? Do you see anything?" And here, the man could respond in a number of ways. He could respond to Jesus in pride, and he could say, well, I can see just fine, thank you very much, and I've got on quite well without you, and it's actually my friends that brought me here. I don't even know what you're going to do, all of that. I think I'll be quite all right. On the other hand, he could have responded in fear. I don't want to offend the teacher. He's already given me something. Maybe it'll get better, you know. I don't want to cause him any trouble. I can see all right. I'll manage, you know. It'll be okay. This man responds with the path of humble honesty. He just says, to tell you the truth, I can sort of see, but it's pretty fuzzy. I can't see clearly. It's a confession of a blindness that's still lingering and a prayer for sight to come. And Mark, our brilliant guide in helping us experience the story of Jesus, he places this right before all of these misunderstandings. But he bookends all these misunderstandings with another healing of a blind man in Mark chapter 10. This man's name is Bartimaeus, and he was sitting by the roadside begging. And he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was coming by, and so he started calling out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. People there that are with him say, you're causing quite a racket, would you please be quiet? And he said, is he still around? Yeah, he's still around, we're trying to hear it. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. All the more, Mark says, he's calling out to Jesus, and Jesus says, call that man to me over here. So they bring him over. What do you want me to do for you? I want to see. I want to have my sight recovered, restored. Rabbi, teacher, let me see. And Jesus says, your faith has made you well. In the first healing, in this bookend of healings, in the first healing, Jesus asks, what do you see? And in the second healing, Jesus asks, do you want to see? Restoration is possible only when we come to Jesus in sincere faith and total humility and say, I cannot see clearly, but Lord, help me because I want to see. The woman I mentioned, absolutely against a white person marrying a black person. She did have a change of heart. Had a granddaughter, married a black man. Difficult, hard for her to process and all of that. She didn't use the same terminology, but she was praying something similar to that idea. Lord, help me to see. Well, when she had her grandbaby on her knee, giggling and cooing and all of that, she was starting to receive a second touch from Jesus. She was starting to see. After being in the church 60 years, a man who never did feel like he could be good enough for heaven encountered a second touch from Jesus in the word grace. For 60 years, he wasn't 60. He was older than 60. For 60 years being at church, hearing the sermons, all of this, suddenly he heard the word grace in preaching. Suddenly he heard the word grace in reading. And he was absolutely blown away by the word grace. Just blown away by grace. And with tears in his eye, said, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm going to make it to heaven. For the first time in my life. What did he need and what did he get? A second touch. The best news of all this morning is that when Jesus restores our vision, he restores it totally, completely. In both cases of the physical miracles, the person's sight is restored and they see everything clearly, everything exactly how they ought to again. Their eyes totally restored. And the disciples, they didn't see with clarity at this point in the story, but Jesus is going to lead them and he's going to guide them so that they can see with clarity. And notice that Jesus, he didn't throw his hands up at them and say, really? Who's the greatest? Who are you? Get out of here, He didn't send them away. I think I would have wanted to send them away. Of course, I'd probably be the one asking about being great, right? But you know what I mean. Over and over and over, Jesus engaged them. And it was painful at times. Sometimes he said, get behind me, Satan, that's ouch. But over and over and over again, he's working with them. He's leading them. He's sharing with them. He didn't give up. It is worth savoring the truth that it is okay to need a second touch from Jesus. It is worth delighting in the truth that it is okay to need a second touch from Jesus. It is okay to embrace that I need further growth, I need further clarity, and actually when I can embrace that, I'm in the position to receive it. It's okay to need more from Jesus. And when we come to Jesus in humble faith, we can count on the fact that we will receive it. It may, as in the case of the disciples, be a long and bumpy road of restoration. As in the disciples' case, it may be that it takes, they didn't need a second touch. They needed another and another and another and another. It may be a long process of us coming to see what we need to see. In the case of these two men that are healed, perhaps something changes for us in a moment. I don't know. When we come to Jesus, Jesus doesn't quit until there is a total and complete restoration. like a painter, Jesus will not leave one stroke unfinished in his masterpiece as he works on you and on me. Like a gardener, Jesus won't leave one weed unpulled. And if you are this morning feeling halfway healed, I just want to encourage you in honest faith to bring it to Jesus. It is okay to say to Jesus, I see, but it's blurry. I don't understand. And Jesus always finishes what Jesus starts. Whether you need to follow Jesus for the first time this morning, you want to be immersed into Christ, or maybe you want to pray that you would grow in your sight, that you would continue to develop, that you would trust that Jesus is giving you that second touch again and again, making you whole in the end. Whatever it is that you might need this morning, you're invited to come as we stand and sing.